We launched officially on February 1st, 2010. At that time, we had no members and no events on our calendar. At this stage, we have over 60,000 members among all our meetup groups in the Bay Area. We've completed over 1,975 events. We're the most active, most prolific startup event organization in Silicon Valley, bar none. Is that all? Okay. Well, anyway, let me expand on that. If we're the most active, most prolific startup event organization in Silicon Valley, and Silicon Valley is the global center of entrepreneurship and innovation, that would make us the most active, most prolific startup event organization in the entire world. That's a little better, but I'll take it. So our mission is to promote entrepreneurship, support entrepreneurs, build community, and provide value in the Silicon Valley startup ecosystem. To that end, we provide content that is practical, actionable, and relevant, stuff that you can actually use to succeed as entrepreneurs. And we believe in building community because Silicon Valley is an aspirational ecosystem that attracts people from all over the world who come here to do great things. Who here is not originally from Silicon Valley? Who here was born and raised in Silicon Valley or the Bay Area? 5 of you. Welcome. So it is important for us to provide multiple channels for you to meet people, build relationships, and grow your network. So in addition to our content-oriented events, we also have some social events, and they're hosted by one of our team members, CJ Terrell. So let's hear it for CJ. Applause.
Loving the applause. Hey, everyone. All right, so I'm CJ. We have what we call TGIF mixers. We have them every 2 to 3 weeks at a place called the Hyatt Regency in Santa Clara. For those of you familiar with or not familiar with it, it's by the Levi's Stadium and also the Santa Clara Convention Center. Our next one's going to be on the 21st. It's a holiday party, of course, 4 days before Christmas, so come out with some festive cheer and some good smiles, and we'll have a good time. We really get people from all over the world to come out. It's a just fun, casual way to kind of mix and mingle from anyone traveling through the area, anyone from the area. You can talk about business or whatever, but they are free events, 8 to 11 p.m., again, next Friday the 21st. Hyatt Regency in Santa Clara, we meet in the front lobby. Hope to see you there. Thanks, enjoy tonight.
With regard to value, it is important that we provide value at each and every one of our events. Not just value for your money, which is important because we know many entrepreneurs are struggling financially. So we make sure our events are affordable, and if you cannot afford the cover charge for whatever reason, come see me and we can work something out. And at each and every one of our events, we make sure that we have a decent, or rather a delicious buffet meal. Is this a delicious buffet meal? Well, let's hear it for Perkins Coie for sponsoring that delicious buffet meal. Applause. More importantly, though, at each and every one of our events, we want to make sure we provide value for your time, which is your most valuable resource. Is anyone here getting any younger besides our panel? So when you invest your valuable time to come to our events, we want to make sure you maximize your ROI. We have many, many partners that help us do what we do: law firms, venture capital firms, angel investor groups, incubators, accelerators, colleges, universities, lots of other players in the Silicon Valley startup ecosystem. Tonight, once again, we're grateful to Perkins Coie for hosting us at this beautiful venue and providing us with a decent moderator. So let's hear it once again for Perkins Coie. A few of our other partners are here tonight. I'd like to have them come up and say a few words. Let's hear it for Michelle and Robotics for Good.
Hi, I'm a founder of Robotics for Good. It's a community, it's an AI communities on Facebook groups. So if you go to Facebook and search for Robotics for Good, AI messaging and chatbots, you'll find it. We have really awesome conversations about artificial intelligence, brain synchronization, BCI, and the latest, most frontier technology. So join us. Thank you.
Next up, we have Teresa from Alley. Let's hear it for Teresa. Applause.
Good evening, everyone. So Rob instructed me I have approximately 10 seconds, so I'll make it quick. I'm the general manager of a newly launched co-working and event space called Alley. We're located on Hamilton Avenue, right in the heart of Palo Alto. We're trying to build an amazing community of startups, founders, and investors around the latest technologies. I would love to see as many of you at our space. Come by, visit us for a tour. I would love to see you there. Thank you. Thanks, Rob.
All right, next up we have Brian from Venture Capital Roundtable. Let's hear it for Brian.
All right. Excuse me. Hi, everybody. I'm Brian Phelps with the Venture Capital Roundtable. I'm the executive director. The Venture Capital Roundtable is a group of 57 members comprised mainly of angel investors, limited partners from angel groups and VC firms throughout the Silicon Valley. We meet twice a month, and the second meeting per month is a deal flow lunch. And if there are any entrepreneurs here that are interested, come see me. We'd love to have you come pitch. We are having an open meeting tomorrow with the investors. So if anybody is interested in coming by to check it out, come see me and I'll give you my business card, which will get you in for free tomorrow. It's at 11 o'clock in Palo Alto. Thank you.
Who likes free events? Yeah, we'll go talk to this gentleman. Unfortunately, tonight's event is not free, but that's okay. I appreciate everyone coming. So here's the schedule for the rest of the evening. Our panel will have a spirited discussion, and that'll take us all the way up till 8 p.m. Audience members, hold your questions. At 8 o'clock, we're going to open it up to questions. We're going to have our audience members with questions come up here, ask your questions, and we'll take as many questions as possible till 8:30 p.m. At 8:30 p.m., we'll wrap up the formal program. You can hang around the network. At 9 p.m., we'd like to leave the building as a courtesy to Perkins Coie. This event will be on video, and I'd like to mention that though our local mission is to support entrepreneurs and help them succeed here in Silicon Valley, our greater mission is to democratize entrepreneurship and innovation all around the world. So to that end, we have a robust YouTube channel, youtube.com/idea to IPO. Go check it out. We have tons of videos. We've documented and archived many, many of our events. And this rich, valuable content is available on demand, anytime, anywhere, totally free of charge. Whether you're in Palo Alto, San Francisco, Maui, Moscow, or Timbuktu. Our partner in this endeavor is Tim Jeggers of Jeggers Films. So let's hear it for Tim. Applause.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, everybody. Sorry. So yeah, I'm Tim Jeggers Films. I'm doing the... Anyway, I'm doing the video for tonight. I also specialize in photography. My emphasis is in events and weddings and instructional and informative videos. So if you have questions about that or where to find this video later, feel free to reach out to me. I'll be in the back and all around, and hopefully I don't blow your ears out. Thanks, everyone.
All right, I think we'll be okay. So at this point, I'm going to pass it off to our moderator. He is one of the top corporate startup attorneys in Silicon Valley. He is a legal practitioner here at this distinguished firm, and his name is Brenner, James Brenner. Let's give it up for Jim Brenner.
Thank you, Rob. And thanks for coming out tonight, everybody. We have a great panel tonight. They're going to introduce each other in a second. Just so we have an idea of who's in the audience, I'm going to run through a list of people. So if it applies to you, please raise your hand. So who here is a founder with a startup that actually has traction? So you have revenue, you have users. Great. What about employees of startups? How many people are here founders without traction? You have an idea and you want to get going. Hey, government employees, academics, investors, fellow attorneys. Yeah, we're all working. What about journalists, bloggers, writers, PR people? Handful of you. Someone just with an idea that wants to get more information? What about people who are just curious? And people have no idea what they're doing here tonight. All right. So I'm going to let the panel introduce themselves. So we'll just go down the line. We're going to talk a little bit about what these panelists do, what they invest in, and then we'll go from there. So panelists, one at a time, if you can introduce yourselves, talk a little bit about your background, and sort of give an overview of what you invest in and the stage you invest in. If you can go first. I know you're itching too.
No worries. So I'm Ephraim Lindenbaum from Advanced Ventures, and I'm a recovering entrepreneur. So I have sat in your seat. I grew a company in Silicon Valley for 11 years, exited in the first dot-com boom. Probably some people are too young to remember that now. And I'd like to say, after I sold the company and did my tour of duty with the acquirer, I came back to Silicon Valley, and it's sort of binary here, right? You either start your next company or you become an investor, and I joke I didn't have any good ideas like you guys all do, so I became an investor. So I was one of the founders of Advanced Ventures, formed in 1999. We're one of the few remaining 99 vintage maiden funds left. We've been investing in 3 core categories: information technology, communications, and sustainability now for the last 19 years. So we're either pretty good at what we do or just gluttons for punishment. We have some key focus areas today, which are food, agriculture, fintech, health tech, and I'm going to just throw out the word. We do some broader cannabis-related investing.
Hi, Honam from Altos Ventures. It's a Silicon Valley-based VC firm started in 1996, so we've been around for 22 years. In 2013, we also started doing international deals in South Korea, which is where one of my co-founders and I were born. We started with a $30 million fund focused on software, early stage, and now we're over $2 billion regulated assets under management. We're an SEC-registered investment firm, so we do more than just venture. I think of the venture portfolio as our discovery mechanisms. Experiment, discover interesting new opportunities. But the venture game is not about investing in a bunch of little companies. The whole purpose of investing in little companies is to try to figure out which is the next Facebook or Google, right? You don't change the world by funding 1,000 startups. You change the world by funding 1,000 startups and then seeing if one of them becomes the next gigantic company like an Amazon that creates hundreds of thousands of jobs. So that's sort of how we think about it. And so we've evolved. We don't do any later stage deals, but the later stage deals we do are the companies that we've helped develop. And I like to say my favorite due diligence period is a decade. So when we make some very consequential investment decisions, it's after we've been working with a company for a long time. And then so far our record is we have one company we've been involved with for 22 years and haven't sold a single share. So.
I'm Jennifer Vancini, and I'm a partner with Mighty Capital, which is a boutique venture capital firm here in Silicon Valley. We have a $13 million fund, so pretty small, but we invest in Series A and B typically in companies that have achieved product market fit. We have a co-investment model, so we've invested in deals alongside Benchmark, Bessemer, and some other less-known venture capital firms. And we have access to a network called Products Account, which is why we're able to invest in kind of later stage with smaller check sizes, because we are able to give a lot more than money to our portfolio companies in terms of access to new customers, new hires, possible acquirers. My own background is primarily in business development. I've been in startups. I went to IPO. I've been in innovation groups of very large organizations. So I've sat on the startup side, the investor side, the LP side, the venture capitalist side. So I kind of see all sides of the deal as a company goes from startup through to IPO or acquisition and understand all the touch points.
Yeah, it works. Hi, everybody. I'm Gaurav Tiwari. I'm the co-founder of Omega Venture Partners based in Palo Alto. We started Omega a couple of years ago after recognizing that artificial intelligence and machine learning was really hitting an inflection point, but was widely misunderstood in terms of where the biggest value potential for the technology lay. And we're really enterprise software experts. We've worked with some of the largest enterprise shops in the world and backed some of the most prominent companies to come out of the last 25 or so years. And really started Omega with the goal of backing the next generation of winners in enterprise software that are leveraging AI to bring about automation and augmentation of the knowledge workforce. It turns out that's a massive tidal wave, and there's all sorts of reasons why, over the last year or so in particular, things have hit a real inflection point. You've heard a lot about it. Our focus tends to be on what we call early growth stage investments. Those are companies that are typically have already raised some money from an angel or perhaps even an A, but have demonstrated product market fit. And where we really add differentiated and unique value is very, very good at connecting those companies with a qualified base of Fortune 500 and really more broadly Global 2000 customers to drive commercial expansion as well as exit optionality. That's something we feel like we've really honed over the years in terms of the processes, the networks, the relationships, and the constant interaction loops to drive information flow with these enterprise customers. So it's one of the hardest problems that enterprise startups have to solve, which is go-to-market and scaling. It's where we really think we bring a unique and compelling advantage to those companies. My own background, prior to 12 years in venture capital, I worked in various operating roles at Microsoft, IBM. I worked in consulting in McKinsey, and I did my tour of duty in startup land as chief operating officer and CMO at high growth startups. I've been fortunate over the last 12 years to be part of the leadership team of several well-known VC firms, as have my co-founders.
I got my own mic right here. So thanks for those great introductions. We're here tonight to talk mostly about trends that we saw in the last year and what we can expect to see coming up. But also we want to give some value to people that might be looking for, or some tips to people that might be looking for investment. So before we get into the main topic tonight, I'm going to quiz you guys. If you guys can give everyone 2 things that you are looking for when you're investing in a startup and 3 things that turn you off from investing in a startup. Because I think we always focus on what people are looking for, and we don't necessarily focus on like what are no-goes or really red flags that would scare you away. Let's start with Ho and work our way around.
2 things I'm looking for?
2 things you like to see and 3 things you don't.
Yeah. Well, exponential curves always get my attention, right? I remember a company coming in, and it's like, wow, that sounds like a really terrible idea. But then he said, well, look at this. Something's happening here. It's like they're growing 7% on a compounded weekly basis for 52 weeks in a row. It was a tiny, tiny company, but it's like, hey, 7% compounded growth, over a year, that's 33x growth, something like that. And it's like that got me curious, right? It's like, what's going on here? The other thing, of course, is people. It's all about, this business is all about people, especially at the early stages, right? There's not much of a business. You can't do due diligence. There's not a whole bunch of historical track record. So, is this person really driven and committed, obsessed, consumed by this idea? Because if they're not, I think it's going to be really tough. It's just too hard. So I wrote a blog post about 12 years ago called Foxes and Hedgehogs in Silicon Valley. And so foxes are the serial entrepreneurs. They go from deal to deal to deal, They have lots of deals. And so they want to prove that they weren't lucky with that one big winner. But the companies, as I said, that are world-changing are driven by hedgehogs, right? They have that one great idea, and they're going to do that, right? There's a reason why Steve Jobs is about to die on the hospital bed, and he's still, talking product. Or Jeff Bezos becomes the richest guy on earth this year, and he says, he's tap dancing to work every day. He actually stole Warren Buffett's line. That's been Warren Buffett's line for decades. He says, I tap dance to work every day. That's another hedgehog, right? He's 87 years old. He's got plenty of money. But what drives him? What gets him to tap dance to work every day, right? And so these are hedgehogs, and we try to spot them if we can.
Jennifer?
Is that better? Okay, there we go. I need a mic for sure. 2 things I look for, people of course, but let me put a pin in that because we're all going to say great people, great founders, great teams. I look for a company or a product that's clearly solving a pain point. It's usually a pain point, not some great upside opportunity. Usually a pain point that justifies somebody writing a check with a smile on their face for your product or service. So I look for like really great customer testimonials, the double-digit growth, things that prove that there's product market fit, that it's a need to have, and that there's a growth opportunity for a large market. The other thing I look for, because of my background in business development, is the ecosystem strategy. Has the company thought strategically about the ecosystem and their go-to-market strategy? You know, what have they put together in terms of their partnerships, their advisors, their board of directors, the entire package? Because the ecosystem will get them leverage, make things happen more quickly. It is ultimately how they will get exited as well, unless they do an IPO.
Yeah, so I think there's going to be a lot of commonality in what appeals to all of us. I guess so. Rather than repeating some of that, I'll say something that when we started looking at what makes for a successful enterprise business today, particularly in when we look at the AI and ML as a driver of the next wave of innovation, one of the things that emerged from our data was expertise in the problem domain, which is a little bit different than what problem are you solving, very important, by the way, but expertise in the problem domain. One of the really interesting things is over the last decade, there's been a little bit of amplification of the importance of young founders in the venture capital world. Well, in enterprise software, you certainly need that energy and the attributes that one would associate with that, but you also need that deep experience, relationships, the understanding of go-to-market, and a nuanced appreciation of the pain points that are being solved. So this expertise in the problem domain is particularly relevant as an area in our world. Of course, we also then look for what is your real addressable market. Ideally, $1 billion or higher tends to be I'm sure a rule for all of us. In terms of what things are not so attractive, I'll name one. We like to see alignment of interest across the company's shareholder base. Another way of saying we'd like to see good governance. So one of the things that is a non-starter, typically very hard for us to get comfortable with, is everything else could line up, but if we see competing interests in the investor base or catalysts to create bad governance in the company, we really that gives us a lot of pause. And the reason is simple. We spend a lot of time with these companies. We're in it for the long run. We see this as a multi-year period of value creation together. And that really only makes sense if everyone's going to win at the same time.
Great. So without repeating all the great stuff my colleagues have mentioned here, I'm going to kind of step back a step and say that of the two things, we break companies into two buckets when they come in the door, either brave new world or better, faster, cheaper. Right? Are you creating something totally new, totally different, or are you trying to do a better job at something that's out there? So that's one of the kind of keys, and then everything shakes out from there, based on how you're going to develop the company. Then the second component at a high level we look for is team, and I think all of my colleagues have mentioned that. But at the end of the day, very few startups, and there are a few key hedgehogs like maybe Apple or Google of the world, but many of them pivot, right? Twitter was a microblogging platform. Amazon started selling books. All right, these companies have all evolved, and that's all due to team and eventual hires they make. So the ability for that initial team to be well-founded and the ability to hire on, right? So those are kind of the keys that we look for. In terms of the three things we don't look for, one is dishonesty. If a founder ever or a team member ever lies to us, it's done. Never lie. And the second one is know what you know and know what you don't know. And as a startup, it's okay to say, I don't know, because we expect you not to know, right? And then the last is ego. This is not about you. This is about your company succeeding and ultimately shareholders, which is what we will ultimately become. But you're a shareholder of your own company. So, that is a huge aspect of it. And if it is an ego-driven, that will end in terrible tragedy oftentimes.
Thanks, everybody. All right, to the main event. Everyone came here to talk about 2018 and what to expect next year. So I think we can all say 2018 was interesting. I think the last quarter has been a little turbulent in the macro market. I feel like we're always insulated a little here in Silicon Valley from that. But What stands out? What is the one thing that stands out to you in 2018? Let's start with Jennifer.
The word that comes to mind is chaos.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, and that's across, all kinds of things, things I've seen in the Valley. Every time I think I've seen everything, I see something surprisingly new and crazy. Sometimes good crazy, a lot of times, what the heck was that crazy? A good example, a pitch meeting. This was maybe March, April, a company came to pitch us and they brought one of their investors with them, and I'm like, that guy looks really familiar. And I Googled him after I got out of the meeting, and I'd seen him on the news prior week. He was being indicted for bribery charges. And
They brought him to a meeting?
yeah, they brought him to a meeting. I'm like, okay, obviously we can't invest in that company if they're associated with this guy, if they have the judgment to think it was a good idea to bring this guy to a meeting. It's a lot of weird, chaotic stuff. Of course, global, political, everything, constant chaos. People checking their news every 20 minutes to see what kind of nutty thing has gone on in the world. So chaos comes to mind. I think we've thrived, like in 2018, despite that. A lot of great companies got funded, a lot of great acquisitions, a flurry of acquisitions in the last quarter. More, venture funds getting raised, a lot of people starting companies. So a lot of good things happening too in the midst of chaos. And it's very hard to plot a trend line when there are just so many things going on.
Let's go the other way. Let's go to O. Yeah.
Yeah, we talked about this amongst the panelists a little bit. We have a sort of a thematic area which it's not any of these buzzwords industry categories, but one of our companies did surprisingly well. The first year they started to monetize, they got to 20 million in profitability very quickly. And surprised us, and when we thought about it, it's like, wow, they're hitting on, obviously when you have a company like that, they're hitting on some kind of a nerve. And it's I think we've put a finger on it. It's a very powerful, very intense problem that we've seen. And we've had now 4 companies, every single one of them that hit this nerve has done very well. And that's sort of addressing this intense loneliness people feel. And it's like, it's kind of sad, but it is a very serious problem. So Facebook's connected everybody in the world, but everybody, I think, feels more disconnected and lonely than ever before. And companies that really, really can touch people and help address that problem have done really surprisingly well.
So 018. So first, it is the year of the multi-buzzword, right? In years in the past, there used to be, this was the year of VR or AR or some other element. This year was the replaceable buzzword. So recently, a startup sent us a deck, and one of our analysts went through and crossed out all the buzzwords in the first paragraph of their description, and there wasn't really anything left. So that's the first thing I'm going to tell you. So, if you send it in, don't tell me it's an intelligent AI-driven VR blockchain tool, because I don't know what that means, number one. And number two, I'm going to veer way off target here, and I'm going to tell you this was the year of cannabis. We're investors in the space. All the major funds, if they're not doing it directly, their LPs are doing it directly. The Netscape moment of cannabis happened in September when the Tilray deal. I don't know if you guys have heard of this company, but in particular, the fund that funded them, which is called Privateer, Peter Thiel had money in, basically returned over 100x. So if you had written $1 million check to Privateer, it's actually 200x. You would have received $200 million from that venture fund on this particular deal. So that's very much top of mind. And then I think we also saw it as the maturing of technology, which is, a lot of these buzzwords actually trying to get applied to real businesses. So that's a big aspect of it.
Drew?
I'd say 2018 has, in a sense, the tone has been set by the macro backdrop, which, we've seen a tremendous amount of volatility and a flight to quality, and I think that's starting to percolate over into the venture world too. On one hand, over the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of speculation. If you look at venture dollars being invested, the numbers are about as high as they've been since pre-crash levels. And there's a lot of sectors of the economy that are getting funded. So I think it's a year that has given a lot of, on one hand, I think some startups are recognizing that that while the times are good, it's a great time to control your own destiny and make sure you're on a path to sustainable business models. While others, I think, are still drinking the Kool-Aid of lots of money available very cheaply, particularly at the later stages. So I think it's been an interesting year. I think there's, a year ago, crypto was about as hot as it could have been. And exactly a year ago, right? If you think about when the peak hit. And today, it's hard to find anybody who's enthusiastic about crypto. So things are changing pretty fast. And, on one hand, it's an amazingly exciting time to be an investor. It's also a very challenging time because the onus to be constructively skeptical has never been higher, nor the payoff.
Thanks, everybody. You want to add to that?
I agree. All right. I agree. I find I'm getting more conservative as I look at these companies. Maybe we even have the discussion, are we getting a little too conservative? But really wanting to see solid metrics, the value, not overcapitalized, and just taking a pause. And we look at 2,000 companies a year at Mighty Capital, invest in 5 to 10, right? So the last investment we did was actually July, because we've just seen things where we've had to pass, where we could say, if this was the one deal we did this year, is this the best we can do? Let's wait. Valuations are going to start to cool. Now I'm getting into predictions. I'm sorry.
No.
But yeah, I just wanted to add to what he said. Reflecting on that, I definitely find I'm getting more conservative, still in a very risky space. It's risky. Conservative risk-taking is kind of my theme right now.
Great. And now you guys can now speak freely, because we're going to talk about what you guys think about, like what sectors did you think particularly were hot this year? I know after you touched on a couple. I don't like buzzwords, but let's just use the buzzwords as sectors and we get down to what that actually means, because I know one thing that I realize is we always use buzzwords, AI. I'm an AI company, but AI is a tool. So we've got to figure out what problems are these sectors solving. So a couple that come to mind are, I know we talked earlier that we were talking about is specifically ag tech, automation, what we've been seeing in reg tech, and IoT. So expand across that. I'm not going to touch on fintech or I'm not going to touch on crypto because we all know where that is, unless somebody wants to add. So the floor is open.
I'll add a little bit about AI. Look, I think everything is a buzzword if it's misused and abused, which I'm not saying doesn't happen. But let's be clear. Part of our job as investors is separating the hype from the reality and back. We are, in a very fundamental way, in the business of market timing to some extent. So when you think about artificial intelligence and machine learning, we see it as you called it a tool, we call it a capability. But what that means really is that, what is digitization? What was moving things from on-prem to the cloud? It was a capability shift, and that led to a business model shift, a different delivery mechanism. So as a capability, at least speaking from the perspective of enterprise software, we're at a really interesting inflection point today. You're seeing some incredible deals happening, like the $9 billion acquisition of Qualtrics that SAP recently bought. At the same time, you're seeing a maturing of the old guard, the SAPs, Oracles, IBMs of the world. You're seeing what used to be the new companies, the Workday, Splunk, ServiceNows, et cetera, kind of getting pretty big at scale, but kind of getting to that level where they're cemented their leadership in large verticals. And we're ready for the next wave. The next wave of companies are going to be AI-enabled companies. So, and that's I think the verbiage that properly describes our view of it, where we're not investing in AI, we're not investing in the technology as the product. We're very much driven, to your point, in terms of what problem can you solve, but looking at this as a massive capability driver that translates into competitive advantage and durable moats for the companies that we back. So to answer your question, we actually think this revolution is just beginning.
focusing more on the sectors, and I want to turn the conversation back to where we think that where was the growth this year, or where was the hot topics this year that we saw grow, and that we really think that is going to expand into next year, and we were excited about.
Well, I think I've already, we have disagreements actually within my own partnership about sectors or themes, thematic areas versus being opportunistic. I'm more the opportunistic because I really don't care about themes. We're just very interested to find that one big company, right? Or not one big company, but just an opportunity to create a big company. So the numbers are getting really big, right? I had a conversation with one of our founders and I said, hey, look, no one's going to want to acquire your little company for $2 billion. Who cares? Like you have to figure out how to get to $20 billion, right? Because if you're Facebook or Google or Amazon, they would much rather do a $20 billion deal that has a chance to move the needle for them than a $2 billion deal that's like it does not register, right? So you saw Red Hat get acquired for $34 billion, LinkedIn get acquired for $26 billion, WhatsApp for 20-some billion. You're going to see more and more of those kinds of deals, not the Instagram for $1 billion. That does not move the needle. These guys are going to start writing much, much bigger checks. And when I got started in the venture world in 1990, in 91, that was a recession year. And the entire venture capital industry raised $1 billion. This is a very different world, right? The top 5 companies in the world, our market cap are the tech companies. And one of our companies raised a $2 billion round by themselves. I mean, these kinds of things are happening. The numbers are much bigger. So my point is that, again, as an entrepreneur, we're living in it's a great time. I agree with the comment that it is just beginning. Every new wave is much bigger. These markets are very big. These companies are very big. So in this kind of environment, to really get the attention of investors, to get the attention of customers, right? There's so many things happening, and mentioned chaos and so on. So to rise above the noise, you have to do something truly outstanding. And if you're one of, okay, let's say you identified the hot sector. Autos was a hot sector. 2,000 auto companies got started. Who cares, right? But 3 emerged, right? And that's what made a difference, right?
And I think what we're also seeing is a lot of white space left in markets. And, I think one of the biggest challenges is entrepreneurs oftentimes take another ground at the same industry, right? When you look out there are plenty of areas left for disruption. We love areas like reg tech, which is a subsector of what we call fintech out there. That might be involved with compliance and other elements within a business. The real estate business et al. Is huge. Lending, payments, these all have white spaces in them. Automation is a huge model, but automation applied at businesses, believe it or not, automation in restaurants is a huge issue. Automation in agriculture is a huge issue. Solving real defensible problems are super important out there. And, I think the days of the kind of, and I hate to use this term because everybody thinks it's incorrect, but the Me Too company, I'm going to be the pet delivery X or the Uber of Y. I mean, those days are just super gone. And, this is really about entrepreneurs coming in saying, I found a problem, I found a seam, I found some white space, and I'm trying to plug the hole. And now it's a point of finding the right tools and the right teams and the right elements, and then bringing us customers to say, yeah, this is a big problem. Jennifer mentioned earlier, we like pants on fire problems. There is nothing like a pants on fire problem for a customer, and there's nothing that makes us happier than that.
Yes, I think AI is the big thing. As it gets less buzzy, it's become more important. It's now table stakes for any product, service, application that uses data, which is almost everything. You have to have it for competitive advantage. An area that excites me using AI is health tech. We're in 2 genomics plays. One is genomic sequencing meets big data to be able to find rare diseases very quickly. Fascinating. The stuff going on in genomics and personalized medicine is fascinating. So we look for those plays outside of long FDA cycles. Where can we find plays? The whole health system, It's 18% of our GDP. It's going to be much more than that in the next 10 years, and it's a global market. There are huge regulatory issues, of course, but huge pain points. I just got my latest insurance premium, quote for next year. We buy our own insurance, my family. It's $2,500 a month, and I mean, there are costs that have to be driven down because we're at a breaking point in the U.S. and around the world. We've got aging populations and new technologies. So I think where tech meets an industry like health, there's opportunity for massive disruption and problem solving. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that in the next year.
Turning to some more, we call bread and butter industries, let's talk about IoT for a second. I know, Jennifer, you like that. You were talking earlier about this.
Yeah. I was just rolled off the board of an IoT company in Canada that does predictive analytics maintenance, so combining IoT with AI, kind of modeling along.
Throw some blockchain in, and we got a winner.
Yeah, throw some blockchain in. You got a winner. But when she was able to, a female CEO, a fantastic CEO, when she was able to start selling to traditional industry 4.0 and show a return on investment of many, many, many times the cost of her system, things started to take off. And it's about the productivity, lowering costs, automation, keeping wind turbines from breaking down, making sure you have the right inventory management for auto parts. These are the kinds of things where IoT is taking off. It is hitting a wall in some areas, edge computing, supercomputing. How do you deal with all this data that's distributed? I think there will be a lot of great investment opportunities in that space.
I mean, I think IoT is just the thing. I mean, I think it's a baseline, right? It's just like a few years ago, there was cloud funds, and now there are AI funds. And, at the end of the day, there are a lot of IoT funds. And I think today, IoT is just a given, right? We expect enablement. And if you're finding something that should be enabled and it's not enabled, then you should probably start a business on that, right? The enabled water meter is actually a surprisingly compelling business. We saw the, internet-enabled power meter for your house, Silver Springs Networks, huge opportunity. So I think there's still a lot of white space out there, and having another connected thermostat is not going to be interesting. But finding something that should be connected, making it connected, and efficiently do so is super interesting out there.
Well, I would say it's IoT. So the problem is, you can't. We're comparing apples to oranges to some extent when we use in these terms. So IoT and big data were two words that, in and of themselves, are just means to an end. If you put gas in your car, that doesn't actually get you from point A to point B. You've got to actually drive it. Putting the gas in your car is a means to an end. IoT is a way to collect data and output data at different connected endpoints. Data itself needs to be analyzed and made sense out of. Now, I'd say, the trick with buzzwords is when you compare the buzzwords, you can't really compare them. You can't really compare, if you ask the World Economic Forum and entities like Goldman Sachs, they compare AI to electricity and the advent of computing. Because
but
it's
isn't
that much
this
of a
the
game
third time around we've invested in AI? I remember doing deals in AI in 2003 when they said this is it, man. This is the end of computing. So what makes it different this time, Gaurav?
That's a great question. There's three major things that are changed, right? So number one, if you think about what makes AI feasible, the first thing is computing, right? 20 years, what used to cost $1 billion with a B in computing power 20 years ago costs 50 cents today. Just let that sink in for a moment. That's how dramatically computing power has become more accessible. And that's everything you read about the cloud, right? AWS and Google Cloud Services and Microsoft Azure. And second thing, the amount of data that was generated last year was more than in the entire prior history of the human civilization on the planet. So the amount of data, in particular digitized data, usable data, is growing even faster than that, doubling every 60 to 90 days. Number three, people have learned from the mistakes of the past. So one of our guys actually is Patrick Winston on our team. He's been the head of the MIT AI lab for the last 25 years. And to your point, F, he's been in this catbird seat of seeing the evolution of AI for 40 years. And one of the things that he points out is, one, you've got certain advancements that have happened in the field, like genuine things. You guys have read about it, neural networks and so forth. But more importantly, people have wisened up. What didn't work in the 1980s was, and kind of, you could say IBM maybe made the same mistake recently, was the computers aren't replacing machines. They're augmenting people. So when you look at, well, where's the multi-trillion-dollar impact going to come from? It's because the job of any technology is to make people more valuable. The biggest expense item in any company is salaries and wages. If you can allow a company to make better use of its people in a win-win scenario, in an ideal world that leads to better, happier, more satisfied employees because they're doing things that they want to focus on that demand their talent, and number two, it leads to massive increases in productivity, right? So this automation and augmentation thing is a big deal. And it truly was not even feasible 2 years ago, right? Let alone 20 years ago. Now, I think, like with a lot of these things, timing the market and knowing what is feasible is critical. But even today, like I'd say to your point, right, there are people who think, well, AI means we should fund the Terminator. I can tell you that capability of what's called artificial general intelligence will not happen for decades, if ever. So you could, invest in that till the cows come home and you'd still be wrong. So I think knowing where to invest is still pretty important. But what is different today is that a lot of that groundwork has been laid. You couldn't do this a few years ago. And I think as a capability, it's something we see as bringing fruition to the waves of investment in IoT, in big data, in cloud compute, in storage, and so forth.
When you get down to things like agriculture, which requires a lot of people, when you get down to food service, food manufacturing, requires a lot of people, the automation, the elements there become very, very important. And these are problems that will just continue and continue. And the scale of them, frankly, dwarfs a lot of the tech problems that we all think about today.
Another sector we saw with a lot of growth and a lot of popularity this year.
Anybody else here
It's
add?
getting bigger. And a few mentioned earlier was ag tech.
Oh, you mentioned something earlier I want to come back to. This is the
No, it's not just another word for cannabis, but no, food and
And
ag.
what do you see? I know obviously it's compelling.
Just to
but
give you
how
an
are you
idea,
seeing
300 to
people start
500 billion. I mean,
solve
these
from
are
the
the biggest
idea to
markets
IPO.
out there.
That's the way
And
to
at the
do
end of
it.
the day,
what trends are you seeing that how people are
a really
addressing
efficient
this,
pants on fire problem.
loneliness issue
The
that we
problem
have?
is we're having
We're so connected.
there are more people and less efficiency. It's taking more and more resources. We're a big investor in what we call plant-based foods. This is a global trend. This is the consumer packaged goods space. We're seeing a big IPO this year for Beyond Meat. Has anybody tried Beyond Meat? A Beyond Meat burger, an Impossible burger? Right? Okay? There is no meat there. Tastes pretty good. Huh? So, this has been years and years of R&D work that's finally coming out, right? We have companies that have a 1.1 to 1 output level of protein. That means the impact in the world is so small compared to the output that they're getting there. So these are huge categories. And then most importantly, the employee drain, the labor shortage is a huge issue. Not only here in Silicon Valley, but globally. And when you get down to things like agriculture, which requires a lot of people, when you get down to food service, food manufacturing requires a lot of people, the automation, the elements there become very, very important. And these are problems that will just continue and continue. And the scale of them, frankly, dwarfs a lot of the tech problems that we all think about today.
So the first company, there was no mobile phones, there was no way to make money.
Anybody else care to
So
add?
it was kind of like
No,
chat
it's-
roulette.
all right,
You swipe like Tinder or swipe.
Oh, you mentioned something earlier I want to come back to, and this is the loneliness problem that we have.
Why would you want to?
And what do you see? I know obviously it's compelling, but how are you seeing people start to solve this problem? What trend?
They figured out how to make
IPO
money off this
events,
stuff.
that's
Because you
the
could
way to
swipe
do it.
Yeah.
and talk to a
What
random
trends are you
person.
seeing
And
to how
basically
people are
swipe and say, well,
addressing
I
this,
actually want to talk to a
the
girl.
loneliness issue that
Or
we
I want to talk
have?
to somebody in Brazil.
We're so
Practice
connected,
my
but we
Portuguese
still feel lonely.
or whatever it was. So if you want to filter the database, then I don't know if it's trends, but
I can talk about some of our companies. We had a company many years ago called Say Now, and it was a company that decided to sell to Google because we could never figure out how to make money, right? So we had a term sheet to raise more money. We could have kept going, but we decided to get out. But what we knew was they were hitting a very important nerve. They had 26 million users, all these teenagers, and a lot of teenage girls, and it's like they're on the service for hours and hours. Like, what are they doing? And we listened in on some of these rooms, in the chat rooms, in the VOIP, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, there's like silence. It's like they're not doing anything. What's going on? And then somebody grumbles something, and then somebody else says something, and they're like just sort of just connected. It's like, okay, they just want to be with somebody, right? And it's like, okay, when you can figure out how to make money on that. And then a number of years later, we found a company that was sort of connecting people on mobile phones. So the first company, there was no mobile phones. There was no way to make money. And it's like, okay, it was kind of like a chat roulette kind of a thing. You could swipe, like a Tinder swipe, and you could talk to the next random person.
There's some music, there's some,
it's like, well,
all
why
kinds
would
of,
you want to do that?
it's like
But
podcasts.
people were doing it, and actually, they were actually making money. Not a lot of money. It was still a small company. It was like, oh, they figured out how to make money on this stuff because you could swipe and talk to a random person, but maybe say you can swipe and say, well, I actually want to talk to a girl. Or I want to talk to somebody in Brazil because I want to practice my Portuguese, whatever it was. So if you want to filter the database, then you have to use some virtual currency, right? You buy it in the Apple App Store and you use some gems and you could filter the database. It's like, oh, that's a clever way. It's like, oh, I remember that. That was like a very, very important problem that we could never figure out how to make money from. We couldn't figure out how to sustain the business. And so that's another one. And that's the only company we've ever funded that grew to 100 million in revenues without ever touching our Series A money. So we got Series A, it's like $3 million. And it's like, hey, this is going pretty well. Let's spend some more to go faster. It's like, no, I want to keep that money in the bank. Like, that's my piggy bank. Okay, well, we'll do a Series B. We gave them another $10 million Series B. And then the company grew so fast that they never touched Series B. So they got all of Series A, they got all of Series B, they got more cash.
Turning our eyes towards
So
2019,
I don't know what's going to happen to that company. That's another
15 days away from the
example.
year.
And then the most recent one this
What
year,
do you see as the
we
big,
funded a little company that
social,
again, it's like they're
macroeconomic,
not that
political
big
factors?
yet.
Pick your
And so we were
flavor
surprised at how
of the
quickly
world
they
and
became
what do you see
profitable. And it's like, what's
affecting
going on?
Silicon
What are they
Valley,
doing?
and particularly
And
the
so this is a
startups
little
in
personalized
2019
radio
that
service.
Either we don't see coming or you don't think you're going to see coming. That's really going to either hurt us or hinder us.
It's like talk radio, you know. There's some music, there's some, all kinds of, you know. It's like podcasting, right? Except it's live internet radio. And so people, you know, want to talk about stuff.
One of our new themes
You call in, it's you know, whatever topic. There's like lots of little topics, but they feel an affinity, a connection with that particular topic, with that DJ, with the people who are calling in. And their monetization model is they give tips. They give tips to the DJ, and this sort of the company takes a piece of the transaction. This is a company that's only operating in South Korea. It's a small company, small country, but you know, 0 to 20 million very fast. Just launched in Japan. And it's like, well, the Japanese feel really lonely too, it turns out. And that other company I mentioned, they have like over 100 million downloads globally. We have a lot of users in South America, a lot of users, and it's the number one monetizing app in Japan, right? So we see people, this loneliness problem, it's all over the world. And so they're hitting it in different areas. Yeah. So it's not just dating apps, you know, it's not just Match.com, there's lots of examples.
This is about 99%. Right?
So turning our eyes towards 2019, I think we're all 15 days away from the new year. What do you see as the big social, macroeconomic, political factors? Pick your flavor of the world, and what do you see affecting Silicon Valley and particularly the startup scene in 2019 that either we don't see coming or you don't think that we're going to see coming that's really going to either hurt us or hinder us or actually make us accelerate really well? So what's the big macro event that's going to change things? If you can make a prediction.
Cheaper, faster, try to get them.
I want to chime in on this one. I think one of our new themes on a go-forward basis is connecting the disconnected. And this is not the loneliness theme, but these people who are disconnected from our society, from our networks, from our
It's a problem that we are personally
unbanked, right? They have no credit files, they can't get a loan. You know, so in Silicon Valley, here we're paying people to pick up our laundry and our food and all kinds of groceries. We think that's how the world works. It's like, no, that's not how the way the world works. And you know, Gaurav's talking about automation and how it's human augmentation. It's going to make humans very powerful, very rich, very, very productive. But so some humans, I mean, there's a massive job shortage. Right? We can't find enough good engineers. So some humans are going to make a lot of money and are very, very valuable. And there are other humans that if they can't figure out how to tap into the technology or the mainstream financial system or whatever,
You can
they're just
see
going
what
to
we're
get
thinking
left behind.
about.
So
You can
this
see if we're looking
this
at
is
weird
about
little areas of
99%,
insurance
right?
or
And what's happening with
finance or
Trump in this country
unbanked,
and this fear and
or
this hate.
areas of health that we're
You know,
seeing being
it's not
super
just in this
interesting,
country
like
with Trump, it's
mobile
all over the world.
applications that
There's
can
a lot of
quickly, detect cancers,
dissatisfaction,
microfluidics, which are cheap and easy and
disappointment,
simple.
people who are being left
So,
behind.
follow us on
And that's a
Twitter there at
major
Advanced Ventures. You
problem.
can see
So
what
we're
we're
looking
thinking,
to
and those are
fund
big
companies that help
categories. And there's so much white space left in both of them, that those are going to both
address
be critical
mainstream
factors that
America,
we'll see this year.
mainstream world populations, right? Try to solve real problems and try to get them better educated, cheaper, faster. Try to get them connected again to the financial system without charging usurious rates like payday loans and things like that. Try to dramatically lower the cost of service and give them access. So there's lots of opportunities, I think. But it's a big problem. It's a problem that we are personally, all of the partners this year set up not foundations, but donor advised funds to sort of start to give back to certain causes. And so we're doing it on a nonprofit basis, but we think we could have a much bigger impact doing it, finding a for-profit company that has a sustainable business model that can solve problems at a bigger and bigger scale without asking for donations.
Yeah, I'll echo what some both Jennifer and Pose mentioned. Healthcare, big space. Fintech, big space. Every single day, we tweet every morning, every afternoon. Can we just back this up a couple times? How cool is it to be an entrepreneur? Let's all start a company this year. Come get some money, hire a bunch of people. Or areas of health that we're seeing being super interesting. Solve the loneliness applications and detect cancer, microfluidics, which are cheap and easy and simple. So, follow us on Twitter there at Advanced Ventures. You can see what we're thinking. And those are big categories. And there's so much white space left in both of them that those are going to both be critical factors
Powers
that
that be
we'll
are
see
going to
this
try
year.
to prop up the economy as much as they can until, I think when we see it down,
I think,
real
maybe
downturn,
the elephant in the big room out there is when does the economy, when does the music stop?
And I think
we
that
know in the
this is
valley
gonna be
that
a
once it
year of
stops,
waiting
it
for the
stops
shoe to drop.
overnight. The M&A stop,
I think it's actually
corporate
gonna
venture
drop,
stop.
put it on.
It can stop overnight, and we don't always, we're not very good at predicting the timing of this. Everyone's trying to predict the timing. Doesn't feel like it's yet. So, adding to that, the geopolitical issues, social strife, I think it's going to be a bad year for that. The world has a lot of work to do to deal with disenfranchisement and overpopulation, and the climate change issues are exacerbating it, and nobody's really dealing with that very effectively. We're willing to spend trillions or whatever it's going to take to go to Mars, but we can't fix our own planet for all kinds of reasons, right? Okay, now I'm going into a really dark space, but I actually think
It's starting to get depressing
I'm
here.
so
All
sorry.
right, can
I
we
think-
just
okay,
back
let
this
me-
up a couple
I was trying to
times and
avoid
talk
that,
about
but yeah.
how cool it is to be an entrepreneur?
right.
Let's all start a company this year. Come get some money, hire a bunch of people.
buy a bunker, buy a bunker in New Zealand. or
Solve the
British Columbia.
loneliness issue.
No, I think 2019, the stock market, I think will be flat. I think we'll see more opportunity internationally. I think U.S. stuff is overvalued. I think we're entering another election cycle. We have 2-year-long election cycles, so the powers that be are going to try to prop up the economy as much as they can until, I think if we see a real downturn, I would guess November of 2020, like we did the last time, right? And I think that this is going to be a year of waiting for the shoe to drop, but I don't think it's actually going to drop if I can put it on an up note. There will be pockets of trouble, but great pockets of opportunity, which is going to bring, I think, from an investor viewpoint, bring us back to fundamentals. I'm going to get my Warren Buffett on, and look for basic business fundamentals and things that are improving productivity as we've covered, or reducing the cost of producing food or delivering healthcare, which will hopefully improve some of these macro issues. But these are things that take a long time to change and adjust. I'll throw a fun prediction out there, that election cycle. We're going to have a fun year watching all kinds of unexpected people throwing their hats in the ring to run for office. And it's going to be great fodder for late night news and the comedians.
I think 2019, I think will continue to be a year of creative destruction. What I mean by that is, one of the big things that's been happening lately, in case anyone missed it, is that every company is becoming a tech company. It doesn't matter if you're in banking or healthcare or insurance, you're getting disrupted by tech. And so I think people are really waking up to that. And I think a lot of the people in this audience might already have woken up to that 3 years ago. But when I talk about the Global 2000, we've seen, it does feel like a time when we're going to see a change in the power dynamics of old line industries. You just look at some of these industries that, due to regulation or due to scale or due to established distribution, have survived waves of disruption. I think that's finally catching up. And I think just like somebody once said software is eating the world, I would say intelligent software is eating software.
So let's give our panel a round of applause for a great session today.
So we're going to take questions from the audience.
Hey, Rob, can I just say one more thing?
Yeah.
I did want to, I was being kind of depressing, so I did want to share one story. So you guys could Google this story. It just came out 4 days ago. If you Google Kleiner Perkins, Altos Ventures, and Unicorn, you'll see this article. And it's an entrepreneur that we met. My partner went to one of these pitching events in Korea. And anyway, this entrepreneur was pitching this idea he thought was interesting, but he gave him a very low score. So he didn't win the prize. He was third place. But afterwards, he said, hey, I want to talk to you about this. It's like the thing that you were talking about. Do you think you could really do it? And it's like, well, yeah. Well, it's like, well, let's come back to the office. I want you to meet my other partners, and let's talk about this. So we ended up seeding that company with $1 million. And now the recent valuation that Kleiner came in is at 1.2 billion. So, and this is a company, this is his 8th company. He had failed 7 times, and you'll see his picture in that article. He's a former dentist. And he was gonna, maybe go back and try to get a real job. And he was gonna give it one more shot. And now I think he's on his way. I think this guy is gonna become a billionaire. So it's gonna be very interesting to see. So never give up.
On that note, who has a question for the panel? Line up here. So I need to come on up, line up here, and we're going to do this very efficiently. No pitches. This is not a pitch event. No disguised pitches, and no overly long statements. So we just want to knock off as many questions as possible. Before we get into that, I'd like to take a quick survey. Who thinks the panel should wear their hat during the Q&A? Put them on. All right. First question.
I think we just won, Rob.
Yeah, my question is, if you do a kind of a self-reflection of the last 5 years into things that you mastered, and I'm not looking at like company names, like the areas, the buzzwords or whatever, what are your biggest regrets and what are your biggest surprises?
That we waited, and that my partner tried to convince me in 2014 to get deeper in our ag and health and wellness cannabis investing, and I paused for 2 years till 2016. I think that was kind of our biggest challenge over the last couple of years, but we're really excited about what we've invested in. So in general, it's been a good couple of years.
All right.
I do want to talk about one regret. We never regret investing in a company and having it go to zero. Maybe we took a shot, and a lot of times it doesn't work out. But the biggest regret over the last 5 years has been, we had this conversation about this company while you had made so much money on paper, and like, hey, you should sell some part of it because the liquidity events are getting pushed out. You have to be multi-billion to go public. So it's like, okay, you have $100 million in profit. Like you should sell maybe like 15%, return some cash back to the LPs. It increases the DPI, which is the distribution ratio to paid-in capital. It helps you raise your next fund, all that stuff. And it's like, okay, well, those are all really good reasons to sell a little bit of stock. You know, nobody ever yells at you for taking in a little profit, right? But what about that discussion that we just had? And those are all very valid business reasons for selling some stock. What about that discussion had anything to do with an investment decision, right? It's like, do we talk about what's the value of that stock and what's the price? And if the value is higher than the price, maybe you should be buying, not selling, right? And if the value is lower than the price, well, you should be selling. Yeah, you should sell 15%. Maybe you should sell 100% of your stock. But I think that's one of the lessons that we've learned is that we have to figure out how to get rid of the distractions. And for us, we're all money managers here. We're fund managers, and we have people to answer to our LPs that give us the money. And we're trying to figure out how to put ourselves in a position that removes the distractions of the money management business so that we are able to make the best decision possible for the investment. And if we, as it turns out, if you actually make good investment decisions, you know, the money management part of it is not a problem. You know, we have lots of investors. We don't have room for those investors. So just focus. And so when you end up selling 15% of one of your winners, right, and that decision is a multi-$100 million mistake, right, that is a much more consequential decision than investing $5 million and having it go to zero, right? As the companies get bigger and bigger, the implications of those decisions are hundreds of millions of dollars, potentially billions of dollars decisions. Right, and so we're trying to figure out how to make, and the outcomes are never guaranteed, right? Like that you can't predict the future, markets can crash. So this is a hard business, and we're trying to just make good decisions. And there's no guarantee that's going to be successful, but we're just trying to make good decisions. And to make good decisions, you have to remove distractions. So that's been my biggest lesson over the last 5 years. We're just trying to make better decisions.
So that's the next question.
Sure. With the exception of maybe Jennifer, most of you seem to be making these massive sized investments. A rounds are now 12 million average, B rounds, huge. What advice do you have for entrepreneurs in the room that have incredible ideas that don't want to overcapitalize and are crossing this massive glacial crevasse between series, or between seed, family rounds, and the size of investments that venture capitalists are requiring today?
Yeah, so at the end of the day, I mean, I think my general rule is entrepreneurs should not concern themselves with that. I mean, you know, entrepreneurs need to build great companies, and if you're building a great company, almost every entrepreneur I've run into has the capacity to almost always, aside from maybe Hose, use capital in efficient ways to build better things, grow faster, sop up more market share, or even in a mercenary way, take the oxygen out of the room so someone else can't succeed in the space. All of which are fine ways to spend money. So my issue is, you know, if we're seeing entrepreneurs spending their time trying to like do the complex math around, geez, am I going to get diluted, or should I take this money? You're not spending your time doing the right thing. Because if you're spending the time doing the right thing and building a kick-butt business, you will be able to put every dollar you have to work, right? And any dollar you can get to work, oftentimes. And if often you don't need that money, that you still go get it and you put it in the bank because you don't know when you'll need that money. So whenever we see this, you know, first it was an issue of trying to get too high a valuation. Then we had to talk everybody off the ledge, right? You don't want too high a valuation. It's going to be a haircut next time. It's not going to work out. Now we're going the other way. Geez, what if I don't take enough money? So the first thing I'm going to tell you is take money whenever you can get it because it's a rare and raw thing to do. Second is, there are plenty of ways to spend it. So don't, you know, as an entrepreneur, we never like to see that, honestly. That's my personal opinion.
Well, the thing is, I agree with like almost all of what you said, because you have to just focus on building the business. Don't create a pitch or focus a business that's optimized for raising money. And I think that's the mistake that a lot of people make, is because you come to these events, like, how do I get money from these investors? And it's like, that's the wrong question. It's like how do I build a business, right? One of our most successful companies, we offered a $2 million Series C financing. So it's like Series C. It's like, and the family, we had to be interviewed with the family because they didn't need our money. The father and the brother were on the board, and it's like, well, like, why should we take your money? And we were able to convince them to take some money, but it's like, well, $2 million is a lot of money. We don't need any money from you guys. We'll take 1.5. It's like, okay, well, like we want 1.5, right? But recently, now the company's successful. Now we had a couple of guys approach them, and they put $500 million on the table. They wanted to invest $500 million. Now this is a company though that does not need any money. We generated $90 million in profits last year. So the $500 million. Well, you realize that you're not going to get a board seat for that, right? Like we don't need any. Like we like the way the company's operating. We like the board. You're not going to get a board seat. They all said yes, right? Now, we did not take 500, we took less, but most of it was for secondary shares to give people a little liquidity so that, you don't have to be desperate to try to sell the company to get money or try to take it public prematurely, right? And don't need the money. We're not gonna take the money to spend it. So, but it's a lesson of, if you focus on the business, the investors will say yes to whatever you say, right?
Sorry, just a quick addition. You asked about crossing the chasm. One of the biggest mistakes I make, and it is very hard to go from C to A, I know. One of the biggest problems is the company waits too long to start those discussions and they run out of cash when they're trying to fundraise. I've seen, it's heartbreaking. So many good companies have to close the door because they ran out of cash, and it can take 6 to 9 months to raise that Series A, depending on the situation. It could take 1 month if you're really lucky. Plan for 9. Yeah, plan for a year, and get to know the venture capitalists before you go ask them for money. Start building the network, get their feedback on what you're doing, get to know what kinds of things they invest in, start looking for that network, even though, yes, you should focus on the business, but, planning ahead, start laying the groundwork so you don't run out of cash, because then it's game over.
So it was interesting how you phrased your question, that how do you not take the amount of money that the VCs want you to take? So I'd say as a first principle, your capital needs have nothing to do with the VCs' desires to commit a certain amount in a deal. And so I think you've got to look at your capital needs first and foremost. It is true that as some firms have become larger, they're facing a lot of pressure to put more capital to work in each deal. And in a way, that's a huge competitive disadvantage for them because they're boxing themselves out of a lot of deals that they would have otherwise got into. Perhaps the very types of deals that were responsible for their success in the first place. So I think as an entrepreneur, you want to strike this balance between running your company with as minimum dilution as possible, because remember, money has a cost. And number 2, being able to build in an adequate buffer. I think this is a very key point that I think a lot of folks have lost sight of. And when money is abundant and valuations are flexible, money becomes cheaper. But I think that is one of the common themes you're going to see, that back to the future, which is entrepreneurs who are focused on being able to control their own destiny, either by having a way to get to cash flow neutral when they need to, or by maintaining an adequate buffer so that they can keep the lights on if things take longer. And that's, I think somebody mentioned this earlier, when there's a macroeconomic downturn, things do freeze and everything takes longer. And I think you just have to be very, very cognizant of keeping some fuel in the reserve tank as well.
Thank you very much. There's a bunch more questions, but can I ask you a quick follow-up one? No, no, I don't want to go. I want to get through theirs. I won't ask it. Okay, thank you.
All right, next question.
I was actually coming here with a different question, but what Jennifer said actually spiked my interest. So I'm a serial entrepreneur myself, and I remember this journey from C to A when you spent a year raising capital. And today you mentioned a lot of, those white spots with automation. Venture capital probably should automate certain things to make it easier for entrepreneurs and faster to raise capital. Because as an entrepreneur, and you said it many times, what you want to focus on is building your company, not have hundreds of meetings with venture capitalists. And so I recently moved to the other side of the table, and I'm trying to address this issue, but what do you think are the main trends? Will we see any changes in the way VCs work so that entrepreneurs can focus on building companies and grow in valuations for all of us?
Hey, now, we've already been disrupted with this whole micro VC accelerator thing. So we don't like change that much. It's the first thing you got to understand. Number two, like a big part of our job is kind of voodoo, right? I mean, this is not, we don't invest on the fundamentals like private equity or hedge funds in the public markets. A lot of this revolves around our experience, our capacity to pattern match. There are some venture funds that are actually doing statistical investment. And there's some thesis that says, look, if we put $100,000 into 1,000 deals, our outcome will be the same as doing a highly curated model that everybody at this table does, right? The jury's still out on all that. And, at the end of the day, that really comes down to is the trust of our investors in us, right? And that could be because we've all had illustrious careers. It could be because we've been doing this a long time. But we are essentially the fiduciary for that capital, right? In terms of tool sets for us, I mean, the ability to make it easier for the entrepreneur, right, is not necessarily in our game. And I mean, I think there's a lot of Mount Kilimanjaro in this as well, which is we are looking for a certain amount of scar tissue and calluses that come with doing it. And we curate this whole process of making it hard for you. Because if we made it really easy, if we're like just ATMs up here, you put in your business plan, money either came out or not, it wouldn't be, we would be inefficient, you would be inefficient, and we couldn't add the value. Right? I mean, we've seen things. Like, we've been through the war. The entrepreneur should be coming to us saying, look, I'm building a business in this category. I want a VC that's actually going to give me help. And everybody on this panel adds value in our category. That's the value. And I don't think you can use any kind of statistical model to, break that down.
Yeah. No, not a lot. The other part to this is you have to realize a lot of times venture capitalists are not just about money, but it's about the relationship you're building with a partner going forward. So you shouldn't be thinking about, if you're going, especially if you're Series A and gone, you're not just getting a check. You're getting a board member, probably getting a board member, and you're getting a partner. So I always advise my clients, think of this as you're getting married to somebody. And on the venture capital side, it's the same way. They want to know you're going to be involved and going forward, and you should be able to understand what they're going to be doing for you. And so if we automate the process, it's going to get rid of that personal touch, which is, quite frankly, one of the reasons Silicon Valley has been so successful over the last 30 years, is the model of reciprocation and personalization and actually building relationships. So automation probably will kill that a little bit. I know early stages, we do a lot of friends and family stuff, and it's a lot of times it is just checks. But my experience, those companies that get a lot of checks, they have a lot of problems later on, rather than ones that find the really strong relationships that support them through the ups and the downs.
What about an automated venture capital panel for our next event?
I'm thinking, Gaurav funds it, we all give our voices, and then we just stay home.
Okay. Let's skip the traffic, right?
See, I'm so glad you brought that up. I mean, that is precisely what I mean.
I'm thinking.
It's one of the things that cannot be automated, right? Because it is required, but it can be augmented.
Yeah, but I want to be a taller robot. Can you make my robot taller?
Make you a more augmented human being.
On that note, next question.
Thanks, Rob. Good to see you. So one trend that I think there's consensus around changing not that much, if not even becoming more exacerbated, is the issue of liquidity becoming harder and harder to get, and the time to achieve that liquidity getting longer and longer. So since this is a forecasting panel, you're probably not thinking just about 2020. I'm interested in what are your predictions for 2030?
I mean, I'm just trying to get through next week, man. I got like a bunch of deals to close before the end of the year, and like I'm trying not to spend every dollar I have with lawyers. So, and no, seriously, it's really hard to look out that far. I mean, frankly, we don't have the liquidity challenges because we tend to invest in a much shorter time horizon. We don't tend to pile on. So, when we're operating in some of these, maybe smaller categories, there's a lot more, M&A that's happening. We often look to shorter time horizons. Being a smaller fund, it delivered returns to our investors much quicker. I mean, we chose categories around that. I think Gaurav is right. I mean, there's going to be a lot of AI products that are going to be very key tuck-in acquisitions for lots of companies. And, the goal there is, can we hit our threshold of 10x or 20x or whatever we need to see in order to get that out the door? So that's what I'd leave you.
I'm just a big believer in entrepreneurs. Like if there is this general AI that comes, the last category that they will replace is that entrepreneur. There's great job security in that, right? The creativity, the perseverance, there is no more human endeavor. And I just think in entrepreneurship is, as I said, hey, look, the goal is to build gigantic companies, but every gigantic company starts small, right? And if you don't start small and do it in the right way, you're never going to become a great gigantic company, right? And it's really much harder to fix a gigantic broken big company. It's like it's easier to start it right? And the last thing I want to do is create more misery in this world, which is create a gigantic company that creates really crappy jobs and extracts value or destroys the environment or whatever, right? And so, we want to create great companies, and sometimes we don't, we make all of our money from the gigantic companies, but the goal is to create gigantic, great companies, and and those are rare. But if I create a bunch of little, great companies, that would be great too, right? And so along the way, once in a while, we'll get a chance to create something big. But the goal is to work with entrepreneurs. I think there's going to be great job security in being an entrepreneur I could predict 30 years from now, that's still going to be true. Because AI is not going to replace the entrepreneur.
The liquidity question, I think, from a venture capitalist perspective, that's one factor of differentiation is time. So not just sector or stage, but time and making sure you have within your portfolio a vision of things not exiting all in the same lump of time, because that's very risky, actually. If you want everything to exit in 2022, that could be very risky, yeah. So we look at diversification on that. We are anticipating when there's a downturn, we'll just have to expect longer liquidity cycles and probably look for those tuck-in kinds of companies. I'm very happy with a solid second base hit. I don't need home runs that take 12 years, right? And most liquidity is M&A under 100 million, so.
All right, we have a little less than 10 minutes left, so we'd like to knock off these questions, quick answers. Next question.
Hi, I'm Sudhir, and I wrote IoT plus AI on my badge before I walked in here. So I don't think of you as ATM machines. I looked at your bio, so I know you are technical ATM machines, MIT and stuff. So my question relates to the due diligence that you do when I come and talk to you. Even though in AI and IoT, I myself have a real hard time understanding the depths of those technology as I implement them. And they are about capabilities, as was mentioned. So I'm trying to use them to solve problems. So what I'm getting to is as somebody comes to you with a pitch saying this, that what level of technical due diligence that you do and who do you call to look at the proposal, who really understands it. And to me, that's a really difficult problem. And I was curious as to how you went about evaluating these very advanced topics.
Yeah, I think, It's a good question, and I think the answer, by the way, will vary by stage of investment. In our case, because we are early growth stage focused, there's two factors at work, and due to our unique organization. So the first is we have the ability to conduct customer reference checks and really hear it from the horse's mouth, you know, in terms of what are the dogs eating the dog food and why are they eating dog food? Why aren't they eating a different brand of dog food? Those questions tend to be very insightful because they yield a lot of insight into the scope and the magnitude of the problem that's being solved and how differentiated your solution is, right? So secondly, I think this is more unique to us because, you know, we are kind of thematically oriented towards intelligent software. You know, we've got a network of 20 senior executives across Fortune 500 companies who actually are immersed, living and breathing the very technologies that we invest in. So we have the ability to cherry pick those guys and girls and bring them into the equation, depending on which industry or function you're going after. But I think it's a critical point because, like, you know, it's one of the reasons why when you have, like, legitimate technologies get corrupted as buzzwords, and it's because there's a natural inclination for entrepreneurs to associate themselves with something that they think is hot. I was hearing crypto pitches last year that, you know, had nothing to do with crypto, but it was crypto. I'm hearing AI pitches today that have nothing to do with AI, you know, and I had to tell somebody, I'm like, just because you use Excel doesn't make you an AI expert. So there's that basic level, but then there's layers to that equation. But it's, you know, those are the two prongs for us, recognizing that we need, you know, part of our secret sauce and our alpha comes from being able to disambiguate the real from the want-to-be.
All right.
I think this panel is a little bit unusual because I don't think anybody on this panel really are real core science investors. So there are some VCs that might really care about the technology. But usually, you know, so we're not one of those kinds of investors. But usually what I've seen is our companies that do really well, the initial product or the initial technology base is just, it has to be good enough to sort of get you going. But it all gets recreated along the way. Maybe there's a pivot, maybe there's not, but in terms of scalability and in terms of robustness and in terms of what has to happen, we learn so much along the way and everything gets recreated multiple times actually along the way. So we don't put that much importance in the technology and how good it is and how defensible it is in the beginning because it's not defensible, it's not that good. It just has to be good enough to get started.
We have time for one last question. Can you make it a good one?
Hi there. Going back to our decision or our focus on next year, I'd like to get the panel's thoughts on what do you see happening in the CVC and strategic investment space for next year? What about deal sizes, deal quantities, and stages you expect these groups to be investing in for next year? Thank you.
I've definitely seen, even in this last year, increased CVC involvement. I don't know what the statistics are. I'm going to guess 25%, 25%. Depends on the sector. I love to see strategics on the cap table. I don't like to see them leading investments. Unfortunately, some of them are starting to lead. That's usually a flag that the company couldn't find a financial lead. That's usually why. I think they play a really important role. I love seeing them because they validate the technology. They're potentially customers, potentially acquirers. The company, though, has to be very careful how they structure those investments and those relationships to make sure they're not exclusive, that they don't have a blocking acquisition vote, you know, all kinds of nasty things. It has to be all upside and no downside. We're getting more CVC interest in investing in our fund. So some of them will make direct investments. Some will do a fund-to-fund strategy because they're afraid they won't be diversified enough if they do it on their own, which is usually the case. But I think that's a great question because it is a big force. And we have, I think, financial venture capitalists and corporate venture capitalists, very complementary businesses and can work well together because they don't lead, when they don't lead.
Yeah, I think corporate venture capitalists, that's what CVC stands for if you didn't know, are part of a group of people I call the tourists. And the tourists come, right now there are lots of tourists, so hedge funds, corporate venture capitalists, private equity funds also. Everybody's dabbling, angel funds, incubators. So the tourists are here, and then they're going to go away when it gets hard. And not all corporate venture capital operations are the same, but at the end of the day, they're corporates, and the guy who run it are corporate guys, and they care about their corporate career paths, not about how the investments do and how about those companies do. And we've done lots of deals with corporate over the years. And the other thing we learned is, it doesn't matter how much money they invest. I mean, they could invest $100 million into your company. Who cares? That is immaterial to that large company's corporate interests. What they care about is what their corporate directives are, and they could care less about their little investment they made in your company. And who cares if it makes 100x? It doesn't matter to them. What they care about is what they care about from a corporate strategic standpoint. So I don't even know why they're investing, because it doesn't even matter to them. But they are, and mostly because they want to learn, and they want to seem relevant and hip and all that stuff. So they're here. The tourists are here.
Well, so looking beyond the typical Valley techie model, corporate venture capital is a big part of validation. So if we look at our food or ingredient or ag investments, these are mission critical, both from a distribution, from a customer perspective, et cetera. So, we have a deal with 10 different major brands in it right now, ranging from Kellogg to Ajinomoto in Japan. And they're all there to hold down another tent and another pole of a tent that's got to cover the planet. So, these are all really great kind of theoretical questions, and CB Insights has a bunch of probably better data than I could ever give you on this one. But at the end of the day, it starts with a financial partner, and oftentimes, that's where you need to dig in, and then the others, to Ho's point, I mean, these are tourists. We jokingly say they're civilians, they're tourists, and they're soldiers, and and I'm a tired soldier.
I think the good news is that as every company realizes that they are a technology company in some way, shape, or form from an innovation and disruption standpoint, that's going to continue to be a catalyst, right, for corporates to get closer to the innovation ecosystem. I think what you're hearing from the panel is how they engage matters, and it's hard to generalize because these programs, as everyone I'm sure will agree, no two corporate programs really look alike. They're all kind of different. So, but I think in general, one of the ways that, it's clear that the early access to relevant partners can be a win-win situation if startups benefit. Access to insights, again, going back to making the world a better place. Well, to some extent, creative destruction is going to happen. But at the same time, if these companies can become more enlightened, these larger companies, in terms of how they embrace innovation, and think about more of an open ecosystem approach rather than walled garden approaches. I think those are generally healthy things that lead to productive outcomes. I think how they approach matters a great deal. And in many cases, the best way to do that is actually do it through leveraging what's great about a corporation in terms of its core assets, distribution, brand, expertise, what have you, but marry that with folks who are the soldiers, who are in the combat zone and know how to fight the trench warfare that is VC, because it really is trench warfare.
On that note, let's give it up for our panel. And let's hear it for our great moderator, Jim Brenner. And let's show our appreciation for Perkins Coie, our sponsors and partners. And let's hear it for our video team and our event team. And let's hear it for our audience. So the video will be on our YouTube channel in a few weeks, youtube.com/idea-to-IPO, so just check it out. The panel will stick around. You can network with them. As a courtesy to Perkins Coie, we'd like to leave the building by 9 p.m. So happy holidays, and thanks for coming. See you next time.